Sharper Than a Serpent's Tooth, written by the Hanged Man 317 and read by Purple Star. Chapter 16.
Hey, Sho! Remember that girl you were talking about? Suzuki? The one you said you thought might actually be a vigilante but decided to never tell me about. The one in my class? Who had a nervous breakdown that you also decided not to tell me about until, hours later? Do you remember?
Yes, snapped Shouta, glaring over at Hizashi with red-veined eyes. He was trying to take a much-needed nap before their field trip to the USJ. But judging by Hizashi's indignant expression, that wasn't going to happen. Though he'd never say it directly, the man had been pissed ever since Shouta decided to inform him of the suspicions he had about Suzuki. Instead, it had just been passive-aggressive comments and waking him up in the middle of naps for an entire day and a half. Yes, I remember. The point, please?
Oh, sorry, I was just making sure, because it seems like you've been really forgetful recently. About mentioning things, important things that people should know.
Hizashi, I swear to God, I will break up with you right now. Hizashi just scoffed, smiling sweetly down at where Shouta lay bundled up in a sleeping bag on the couch.
I'd like to see you try. Who's going to get you coffee from that fancy place down the street, The one you refused to step foot in because it would ruin your image?
Still you, Shouta grumbled, curling in on himself. But maybe you'll be less obnoxious about it.
Maybe. Or maybe I can be more obnoxious about it.
Doubtful. I don't think that's possible.
Bold of you to assume that I've reached peak levels of obnoxious.
I'm calling HR, called Minoru from across the room. You two are disgusting.
We aren't even touching each other.
So domestic. So boring. It makes me sick. Closing her book with a yawn, she looked at the two through narrowed eyes. Wait, did you just say vigilante? You misheard, said Shouta stiffly, glaring up at a flustered Hizashi.
Yeah, what I actually said was...
Never mind, I don't care. Minoru had already opened her book once more, settling her glasses on her nose. Let me know when whatever it is blows up in your face. Shouta huffed into the warmth of his sleeping bag. What, so you can bail us out? We can handle ourselves. No, so I can be there to take a picture. Duh. Supportive as always, Minoru. I aim to please. Oh shit, could that be my new tagline? Or is it too on the nose? Minoru closed the book again, tapping her chin thoughtfully as she made her way out of the cluttered lounge. I need to call my agent. Don't have makeup sex while I'm gone. We are grown adults, not hormonal teenagers, snapped Shouta at her retreating back. Minoru only laughed. Sure, whatever you say. Now who should be calling HR? Shouta muttered darkly, glaring at the door before dragging his gaze back to a laughing Hizashi. It wasn't that funny. What is it you wanted to talk about?
Oh, right. Suzuki Era, the girl you didn't tell me about?
Shouta felt his eye twitch. Yes, I know who she is.
She didn't show up to homeroom today. I asked around and she wasn't in her other classes either.
Maybe she's sick?
Maybe, said Hizashi doubtfully,
leaning on the other side of the couch in thought.
Honestly, I thought she was coming down with something because she's been so out of it in class. But then yesterday she actually looked a lot better. And now she's absent.
Shouta hummed thoughtfully, retreating deeper into a sleeping bag. That's it?
Well, I mean, yeah, but...
Hizashi waved his arms around in his frustration.
It's weird, isn't it? She just had a big panic attack in school. And you just told me about this vigilante business, and now she's missing?
Absent from class does not mean missing. Besides, I'm not so sure about the vigilante thing anymore.
Still, don't you think it's weird?
This is why I didn't tell you,
said Shouta suddenly, voice muffled by the fabric.
I knew you were going to get overprotective. Start seeing signs everywhere.
Excuse me? Fine then. How about this? I called her house to see if her parents were pulling her out of school today, and do you know what happened?
I'm at the edge of my seat.
Nothing. No one picked up.
Maybe they're working?
Then who's taking care of Suzuki?
Hizashi threw his hands up in the air, twirling away from the couch.
She's a teenager. She can take care of herself.
Shota's voice came more doubtfully, and it was with a reticent groan that he unzipped himself from his sleeping bag and arched his knotted back into a crackling stretch.
See? See?
Jabbing a finger in his direction, Hizashi reined in his volume only when Shota's eyes flashed red in warning.
Sorry, but still, you're worried now too.
Well, you could have led with that, muttered Shouta, instead of being passive-aggressive.
What am I supposed to do? I can't just check on her or anything. That would be weird, wouldn't it? Or should I?
Shouta cut off the incoming jumble of words with a sigh and a brisk shake of his head.
I'll do it. I'm patrolling tonight anyway, and I'm off school after I take the kids to the USJ. I can swing by your house and check if the lights are on at least. Would that put your mind at ease?
I don't know. I'd rather actually see her, you know. She's such a sweet kid, even if she is really quiet. And if you think there might be something going on at home...
I have no proof.
Yeah, but still.
Fine. I'll knock on the door. I can make up something about a disturbance in the area or something like that. Is that abuse of power enough for you?
Maybe.
Great.
Shouta checked the clock with a groan.
And now I have to take a bunch of screaming teenagers on a field trip. You're the one who interrupted my nap, so if I strangle any of them, that's on you.
Really? I think that your sleep deprivation would give them an edge. If anything, the little listener should be thanking me, said Hizashi with a cheeky grin. Seriously, thanks, Sho. I'm still a little worried.
Yeah, me too,
said Shouta reluctantly, ignoring the way Hizashi beamed.
Look, it's an unusual situation, but we can't freak out about it. We need to treat her like a normal student until the picture becomes a little clearer.
I know. It's just hard because she's right there, you know? Even without the vigilante stuff, I just want to pick her up and shake her and say, go see a therapist. Like, figure out what's wrong. Help her, I guess.
Well, you are a hero, and a good one at that. Stop looking at me like that.
Shouta rolled his eyes, ducking under Hizashi's outstretched arms and making his escape towards the door.
Just keep a cool head about it, and it'll be fine. I'm heading out. Try not to burn down the place while I'm gone.
No guarantees,
chirped Hizashi, prompting a sigh and the slightest hint of a grin as Shouta made his way down the hall. Another long day ahead of him. But hopefully his students wouldn't be too insufferable during their rescue training. Besides, he had 13 and All Might to split their attention, and rescue training was a lot less liable to lead to students punching each other in the face than combat training. So, maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. This was bad. This was really, really bad. Shouta had dealt with a lot of villains in his life, but never had his school and pro-hero career intersected quite so catastrophically. The moment he had tasted that faint swell of static in the air, saw a barely perceptible flicker in the lights, felt the rippling pressure of a warp gate being opened, The only thing he could think of was protecting his students. They were so young. Far too young to deal with something like this.
Is training starting already?
Called Kirishima, straining to get a look at the shadowy Quirk that had overtaken the central plaza of the USJ. The fact that he couldn't immediately sniff out the danger of the situation only highlighted his inexperience.
They're not ready. Stay back,
Shouta ground out, pulling his goggles over his eyes and pinpointing a few key targets in the crowd. The ones who looked like leaders or heavy hitters. There were only a few. It was hard to make out, but there was obviously the shadowy man who had warped them in, a hulking figure standing back from the rest, and next to him, a slender, pale man covered in dismembered hands, fingers wrapped around the throat of... Was that Suzuki Era? Shit. Of all the people to drag in the middle of this mess, why did it have to be her? The girl had a panic attack from a particularly boisterous crowd. He was surprised she was still standing upright as a steady stream of countless villains walked past her. It was hard to tell from this distance, but she didn't appear to be breaking down. That was good. She'd need to keep her head if he was going to get her out of there. Shouta leapt into action, scarf streaming behind him as he erased the Quirk of a few frontline villains and dove in with a powerful series of kicks and punches to knock them into the dirt. Luckily, they were easily distracted by the loss of their quirks. That distraction was a weakness he capitalized on often. But he couldn't count on it here. Not with so many opportunities for these villains to learn from the mistakes of their fellows. Sweat was already gathering his brow when he ducked beneath another blow, twisting to wrap his scarf around a second assailant, and leaping back with a downward arc to slam them into the fist. He wove around another attack, winding his scarf around an outstretched fist, and pulling it over his shoulder into a twofold kick of a man with 4 legs. The black mist loomed at the edge of his vision, and Shouta made sure to keep his quirk active and centered on the pesky teleporter. It wouldn't do to have him running off. Teleportation quirks could be tricky once they got control of the field. The yell of an oncoming attacker, and Shota's eyes began to itch as he bent backwards beneath the swing of bladed hands, straining to keep the mist villain within his gaze, even as he sent a swift fist to the kidneys of his assailant and drove them onto his knee. The pale villain with hands covering most of his body walked into his line of sight. And now that Shouta was closer, he could see how the villain held Suzuki before her, fingers tight around her neck. Even as he darted sideways and sent out his capture weapon to loop around another thug, he could make out Suzuki. The way she stood, the mess that was her clothes, the blood welling thick and dark brown at her upper arm. She looked calm, disconcertingly so. Was this not the same child who'd been huddled up in his office with a violent panic attack? A blur of movement caught his attention. Shouta barely pivoted to avoid another strike, forced to turn in order to drive his elbow into the ribs of a man with wicked spikes sprouting from his back. His eyes burned. And with that movement, he let them close for the briefest moments, until the man was on the ground at his feet. Immediately, Shouta opened his eyes again, cursing when he saw that the mist villain had escaped. Well, 13 would have to deal with that for now. Right now, his priority was getting Suzuki away from that villain, even if he needed to fight his way through this mob to do it. Weaving, dodging, ducking, throwing out his capture weapon with precise aim. Shouta felt his knuckles begin to ache with every knockout, his arms growing battered from strikes he couldn't twist away from in time, and was forced to block directly. A few sharp stings along his body where a lucky swing of a blade had drawn blood. Unconscious bodies littered the floor around him in motionless heaps, but still more came. The tide was endless, and even as he wound his capture weapon around another villain and slammed him into a group of 3 more, he felt like he was barely putting a dent in their numbers. His eyes were starting to water. Shouta wasn't used to a drawn-out fight like this, and the wear was beginning to show in sluggish movements. Mistakes he wouldn't have made earlier now costing him precious time and sweat and blood. Fuck. He actually wished All Might was here. Even if the man was insufferable, this was his area of expertise, not Shouta's. Still, he had to keep fighting. If he went down, then his students were next. Not to mention he was the only one who knew Suzuki was here, the only one close enough to help her. He had to push past the pain. That's what heroes were all about, right? Plus ultra. The crowd was thinning now, and Shouta couldn't tell whether it was because he'd already knocked so many of them out, or if they'd been teleported elsewhere by that mist villain. He hoped it was the former, but strongly suspected the latter. Well, if all the thugs were like this, then hopefully his students could handle themselves. He needed to focus on cutting off the head of this snake, and freeing Suzuki from its coils. Wait, did he have a concussion? Or was that just Quirk exhaustion making itself known in the itch of his eyes and the ache at his temples? It didn't matter. Leaving another thug to slump, groaning, into the dirt, Shouta stepped forward and found an open path towards the pale, hand-covered villain. The one who had his fingers wrapped tightly around Suzuki's throat. Who was walking forward, wide grin peeking out from behind the severed hand covering his face, as he thrust the girl in front of him, daring Shouta to come closer.
I have to admit, you're even more impressive in person, Eraserhead.
Oh, great. A talker. Shouta didn't like the look in his eyes. Didn't like the way his hand twitched around Suzuki's neck. Didn't like the way she stumbled after a particularly harsh shove. The way her eyes seemed to drift into glazed uncertainty before snapping back into sharp focus once more. The way her jaw tensed almost imperceptibly with what could only be pain. He didn't like the crusted blood dried and flaking at her upper arm. How there could only be one reason for it. One culprit.
Unfortunately, I'm here for All Might.
The man was still talking, still drawing closer, voice rasping in the sudden quiet. Shouta eyed the remaining thugs around him, and saw they'd backed off when this man had stepped forward. So he was the boss, then.
Where is he?
Not here.
Shouta had dealt with hostage situations before. His quirk made him extra handy for them. Unfortunately, he didn't have the luxury of a trained negotiator and a squad of officers at his back this time. It was just him, a swarm of criminals, and this villain with an unknown quirk who held Suzuki tight in his grasp. The villain hummed, drawing it out with a slow glance towards the entrance of the USJ. Shouta didn't follow his gaze, instead seizing the opportunity to take better stock of Suzuki, catching a flurry of movement at her sides. Her hands were flapping about, fingers wriggling and winding around each other. Shit, maybe she was freaking out, just letting that energy flow through her hands so that she might not draw attention to herself. Although now that he was looking, the motions, they seemed to slow, settle, take a certain shape that was almost familiar. Twitching, twisting into... Was she signing at him? The man turned back to him, and Shouta gritted his teeth as he forced his head to remain level, giving the illusion of looking at the villain while beneath his goggles his eyes darted to and from Suzuki's hands.
He's supposed to be here, Eraserhead. I brought so many friends to meet him. This little student as well. I think she'll be very disappointed that he never showed up.
Risky. Shouta wanted to shout at her to stop, but the flurry of movements never ceased. Her hands didn't even tremble. Signs rushed but clear, small and whispered so as not to catch the villain's attention. Can you see me? Can you see me? Nod, sign, do something, anything to know that you can see me. Can you see me? Can you see? Can you see? Can you see? Over and over and... Fuck. The villain was talking again, and Shouta needed to keep his attention split between the two, or else he was going to miss something big.
Something he couldn't afford to miss.
Subtly, hiding it with a shake of his wrist, Shouta spelled out, yes. Suzuki's hand stilled for a moment, and Shouta took a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding, before turning his attention back on the villain.
All Might isn't here right now,
he said, keeping his voice as even as possible.
There's nothing for you to gain by staying.
Why don't you tell me where he is, then? And we can pay him a little visit.
In the villain's tight grasp, Shouta could see Suzuki stiffen, could see her try and shake her head, before the fingers dug more cruelly into her throat.
Idiot. Idiot. She needed to stay still and not draw attention to herself before.
Her hands were moving again.
Because of course.
Shouta bit back a growl of frustration as he tried to split his attention between talking and reading her signs once more.
I think that would be a little difficult. Even with a warp quirk that impressive, there must be some limitations.
He disintegrates anything all 5 fingers touch. Do not let him touch you.
SHIGARAKITOMURA. Disintegration quirk. Can you see me?
Why did she feel the need to give him a name, when finger-smelling it out like that took so much time? So much of her time. She could just tell him afterwards when she gave her statement to the... She thought she was going to die. She was giving him any information she thought would be useful in an investigation. Suzuki's movements became more frantic as the villain, Shigaraki, dragged her forward with another half-step.
The big bird, Blackbird, Brainbird can break bones.
Bird? Was she talking about that hulking villain, standing listless off to the side? If so, then he'd believe it. The thing had muscles that rippled with every stilted movement, its eyes blank as it stared unnervingly at Shouta.
They want to kill number 1. Bird can break bones. Disintegration quirk. Yes? Can see? Bird break bones. Not fight for you. Bad fight. Leave. Run. Kid's safe now. Run. You can. Fast. Run. Break bones. Run away.
Shouta pointedly looked away, feeling his jaw click with tension as he leveled a poisonous glare at Shigaraki. Assuming he knew sign was a bold move, attempting to communicate in a delicate situation like this was even bolder. Telling him to run when she just informed him that this man could disintegrate anything with a touch? The man who currently had his hand clasped around her throat. That wasn't bold. That was fucking moronic. Shigaraki's head tilted to one side, and Shouta could barely see his eyes narrow beneath his mask.
Are you paying attention, hero? I'd have thought that you'd be more concerned about this student, but maybe I was overestimating you. She did say that no one would care after all.
Shouta caught the barest hint of a wince on Suzuki's face, a squint of the eyes and a purse of the lips, before it was smoothed away like still waters. More frantic movement just beneath his eyeline, and Shouta sucked a breath between his teeth before glancing down.
I'm fine. Don't worry. Run. Leave. Fine. Protect students. Good here. Won't kill me. Already said. Won't kill me. Bird breaks bones. Bird fast. Will kill you. Won't kill me. Leave.
It was difficult to keep the scowl from his face, to tamp down the sickening feeling that swelled in his chest, and drag his eyes back up to Shigaraki. Harder still was ignoring the thin-lipped smile she pressed across her face, bent and joyless. And was that supposed to be for him? Was the kid actually trying to reassure him? To get him to leave her behind? He needed to get her away from there. He'd be able to adjust this horrifying martyr complex later, in a more controlled environment. Maybe he could activate his quirk and drag her away with his capture weapon? He risked other villains getting involved, but he was quick.
If you want to hurt someone, it should be me.
He managed to grind out between his teeth.
Get in his head, know his motivations. Empathize, then influence. What do you want with All Might?
The grin widened, splitting Shigaraki's face in a frightful display of bared teeth.
Isn't it obvious? We're going to kill him. The symbol of peace.
Shigaraki spat at this, hand clenching spasmodically around Suzuki's throat and making Shouta bristle.
We are going to grind him into the dirt.
Why?
Why?
Shigaraki threw his head back into a laugh, and Shouta considered pressing the advantage before the villain's gaze snapped back to him just as quickly.
Because heroes are a sickness on this society. Because your violence will only beget more violence, and I am here to deliver that promise. Because, hero,
he sneered,
I want to.
If heroes are a sickness,
said Shouta carefully, readying his weapon just in case.
Then shouldn't you be focused on me? That kid isn't even in the hero course. She has nothing to do with this.
But that's where you're wrong, Eraserhead.
Another step forward. Shouta shifted his weight, adjusted his stance, kept his eyes on the hand at Suzuki's throat, and steadfastly ignored her frantic signing just beneath the sightline.
This entire society is rotten, and I'm not just going to kill All Might. I'm going to destroy him. Destroy all of you annoying heroes until everyone realized just how pathetic you always were, Eraserhead.
Shigaraki dragged Suzuki closer to him, plumes of dust rising from where his feet scrambled against the ground. Unidentifiable emotions writhing across Suzuki's face before quickly being discarded once more as the villain leaned down to bring his head level with hers.
I'm going to make this hurt.
Shigaraki gleefully laid down the last finger. Shota's hair lifted from his shoulders as he hastily activated his quirk and rushed forward, capture weapon already slipping through his fingers. Suzuki was faster. She reached up in one practiced movement and grabbed hold of Shigaraki's hand and wrenched it back. The villain gave a hiss of shock, or maybe pain, as Suzuki calmly spun around and sucker punched him right in the stomach, elbowing him in the face when he doubled over. That move was very familiar. Shigaraki was already falling to the floor when Shota's capture weapon began to snake around Suzuki's waist, ready to draw her back towards him. Then, as quickly as she had struck, she was gone. A blast of wind knocked Shouta back a few steps, forcing him to shield his face with one raised arm before the dust began to settle, and he could finally start to piece together what in the name of God had just happened. Shigaraki was on the ground, beginning to stir with a string of vicious curses falling from his lips. Where Suzuki had once stood, there was nothing but clouds of dirt and the faint imprint of footsteps on the loose ground.
Where?
Shota's eyes followed the plume of dust, widening when he saw the hulking figure of that beaked villain hunched over a few yards away.
I didn't even see him move.
Wait. Where the fuck was Suzuki Era? End of chapter 16.